Hey, folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Now, most of the people you're about to hear from did not set out to have an encounter. In many cases, the moment they stayed with them was not seeing something unusual, but realizing that whatever it was had already been present long before they noticed it. Now, this episode documents firsthand accounts in which patterns repeat across locations, witnesses, and time. Now, some of these cases appear unrelated until the details are placed side by side. Now, if you're new here to Phantoms Monsters Radio, we focus on witness testimony and recurring behavioral patterns rather than speculation. Now, follow the show to track these cases as they continue to develop. Now, people make certain assumptions about strange encounters, that they are rare, that they are isolated, and that they happen once. And if you're unlucky enough to experience one, you're done. But that assumption does not survive close examination. Now, over the years, I've received thousands of reports from witnesses who have insisted that what they encountered did not end when the moment passed. It returned, sometimes years later, sometimes miles away, and sometimes in different form entirely, but always with the sense of recognition as if whatever they encountered remembered them. Now, tonight's program is not about a single sighting, a single creature, or a single explanation. It's about patterns, about witnesses who experience more than one encounter across time, geography, and circumstance. People who did not go looking for answers, yet found themselves confronted again and again by something that refuses to stay confined to the memory. In many of these cases, the witnesses did everything we are told to do. They moved on. They stayed quiet. They tried to rationalize. Some dismissed their own experiences for years. And yet the encounters repeated, sometimes with frightening clarity and sometimes subtly, and sometimes years apart. That raises an uncomfortable question. If these experiences were merely mistakes, misperceptions, or imagination, why do they recur with such consistency? Why do different witnesses describe similar progressions? And why does the second encounter often feel more deliberate than the first? Tonight you'll hear 7 reports. I will not embellish them. I will not reinterpret them as I read them. And I will not tell you what to believe. What matters here is not belief, but recognition. Recognition of recurring elements, shared behaviors, and unresolved patterns that emerge when these accounts are placed side by side. Because if encounters repeat, then we are no longer dealing with random events. We're dealing with something that returns. And the question is not whether it exists. The question is why. Now, this first case, the following account was shared by a witness who relayed an experience their mother described to them. What matters here is not belief or interpretation, but continuality of perception and internal consistency across the event. Listen carefully to what is described as being seen, felt, and remembered, and separate those observations from the conclusions that were later drawn. Now, this witness tells me, hello, in 2007, my mother told me that she had been abducted by aliens. I was the only person she confided in about her experience because I was the only one who believed her. This is her incredible story. Now, at the time, we were living in Wyoming, Michigan. One night, around midnight, my mother awoke in a state of paralysis. She looked over and saw a dozen or so pairs of small, beady red eyes. Initially, she could only see their eyes. The rest of their bodies were nearly invisible, just discernible enough to distort the view behind them. She described how some of the creatures approached her and began poking her with their 3-fingered hands. One of them breathed in her ear, producing a sound typical of what movies portray aliens as making. Now, after that, the feeling of paralysis lifted, allowing her to get up and walk to the bathroom, hoping it was all just a dream. However, all 12 to 15 small creatures followed her, trailing from the bathroom to the kitchen and back to her bedroom. She noted that they never spoke throughout the episode, yet they continued to float behind her, remaining semi-transparent as she moved from room to room. Once she returned to her bedroom, she noticed a light in the backyard. Leaning over to see where the light was coming from, that's the last time she remembers until she woke up the next morning. She has no recollection of falling back to sleep. My mother has struggled with insomnia for years and has always found it difficult to fall asleep and stay asleep. Now, throughout the incident, she never lost sight of the creatures, but they were gone when she woke up the next day. Now, at the time, my sister shared a bed with my mother and was completely undisturbed throughout the whole event. My mother has no reason to fabricate such a story. In fact, it has led people to view her as if she were crazy. However, after researching the type of small humanoid she encountered, I discovered that many other abduction victims have reported similar experiences with semi-transparent creatures that have red eyes and are about the size of a small child. So let's define what we just heard without inflating it. This account describes a nighttime experience marked by paralysis, the perception of multiple small semi-transparent figures, tactile sensation, and a clear break in memory at the end of the event. Those are the core elements. What matters here is that the experience unfolds in stages rather than flashes. The witness reports continuality of perception, movement through the home, and final loss of awareness. That structure is important, regardless of interpretation. Now, similar descriptions appear across many encounter reports, not only in modern alien abduction narratives, but also in the older folkloric and historical accounts involving small, indistinct beings observed during altered states of consciousness. That overlap provides context, not confirmation. Now, at this stage, the report establishes experience, not an explanation. It does not demonstrate repeated encounters by the same individual, but it does reflect a pattern of imagery and sensation that persists across time and cultures. This is the distinction we will keep returning to tonight. Pattern does not automatically equal cause, and familiarity does not equal intent. Now, the following account involves a primary witness who reports two personal encounters separated by time and distance, along with additional encounters experienced by close family members in the same general region. Now, what we are examining here is not certainty or belief, but whether proximity, repetition, and shared geography suggest continuity or coincidence. But attention to locations, distances, behavior, and what is directly observed versus what is later concluded. Now, the primary witness recalls two personal encounters with a mysterious figure separated by roughly 10 years and several miles. The first encounter occurred in June at approximately 4 p.m. A freshly cut gas line across the rural roadway with a dirt mound constructed to block vehicle access. Sitting atop this mound approximately 50 to 75 yards from the road was a prominent black figure with its back turned. The witness described it as having broad shoulders, a large head, a visible neck, and a posture strongly reminiscent of a mountain gorilla. The figure appeared fully grown and motionless. Then the second encounter took place years later near a small creek at dusk, roughly 45 minutes before dark. While driving along the road, the witness looked toward a break in the trees and observed a massive gray Sasquatch standing approximately 12 feet tall. The creature was positioned sideways only 25 to 30 feet from the road, and its stillness was so complete that without direct eye contact, it could have easily been mistaken for a tree. The fur coloration resembled original real tree camouflage, primarily gray with darker striping. The witness suspected this individual might have been older than the first based on the change in coloration. This second sighting occurred approximately 6 miles from the first location. The witness also recounts his father's encounter in 1971 or 72. While driving, his father saw a dark-colored bipedal figure cross the road directly in front of his vehicle. The creature stood roughly 10 feet tall and crossed the road in 2 strides. It then ran across 100 feet of 60 feet. By the time the driver reached the crossing point, the figure also had already entered the tree line on the opposite side. Now, at the time, Bigfoot was not a common topic of discussion, and the witness described confusion at seeing a man-like figure covered in shaggy hair. Later, others in the area reported similar sightings. Approximately a mile and a half from that crossing, a woman living alone experienced a close-range encounter. Late at night, she heard what she believed to be raccoons disturbing her garbage cans. Armed with a .38 revolver, she opened her back door and immediately saw a dark fur-covered humanoid near the cans. Her porch stood 4 feet off the ground, and the being was at eye level with her from a distance of only 8 feet. In fear, she fired all 5 rounds into its chest. The creature yelled and fled into the woods, never to be seen again. Nobody was recovered, and no scavenger activity was observed in the area afterward. An earlier family incident involved the witness' uncle, aunt, and sister-in-law and her boyfriend. Now, late at night, after settling in for sleep, the uncle heard a noise outside the bedroom window. When he approached and looked near the glass, he realized something was looking back at him. He described seeing a man-like face at the window before it suddenly turned and ran. Believing someone was peeping, he alerted the others. The boyfriend, a large football player, chased the figure as it passed the back door. He caught up and attempted to tackle from behind, aiming for the shoulders. Instead, his arms closed around the creature's hair-covered waist. He slid down his leg and fell away as the creature continued into the woods. Now, afterward, the uncle inspected the area beneath the window and found nothing the figure could have stood on. The window was estimated to be 8 to 9 feet off the ground, suggesting that the being was at least that tall, possibly taller if it had not bent over. Now, a later unrelated incident involving another uncle provided a contrast. He heard a similar noise at his window and found a black bear standing upright and peering inside. While frightening, the family noted the apparent differences in behavior, proportions, and aftermath compared to the earlier encounters. The witness concludes with a firm belief that Sasquatch is real and expresses skepticism that these beings are merely apes. In his view, they may represent a surviving relative of modern humans or Neanderthals that did not interbreed and vanish. Now, this report presents multiple sightings across decades involving different witnesses, similar descriptions, in a limited geographic area. That immediately raises the questions of pattern, but it does not resolve it. What stands out is consistency in size, posture, bipedal movement, and stillness, along with repeated descriptions of dark gray fur and rapid locomotion. These elements align with long-standing Sasquatch reports across North America. Now, at the same time, these encounters are independent events, recalled years later and filtered through memory. The belief that the same or related beings are involved is understandable, but it remains an inference rather than a demonstrable fact. Historically and folklorically, large man-like forest beings appear in indigenous traditions, early settler accounts, and modern eyewitness reports. Continuity defines the phenomenon culturally, not biologically. Now, at this stage, the account supports regional recurrence and descriptive similarity, but it does not establish identity, intent, or lineage. What it provides is another example of how certain environments continue to generate the same kind of encounter reports across time and across witnesses. Now, the following account comes from a witness described two encounters separated by decades, both involving the same unusual visual distortion and sound. Now, what matters here is not how the experience was labeled at different ages, but the continuity of perception across time, environment, and emotional response. Listen to what was observed, when it occurred, and how recognition emerged years later. Now, the witness states, "This is 100% true, and it's difficult for me to share because every time I try to tell someone about it, I get laughed at and accused of just trying to pull their leg. Recently, I came across an article about a woman who was hunting and saw an invisible and cloaked creature that she described as resembling the predator from the movie of the same name. I read her story and saw the picture she took of this predator, but personally, I think the image is just a combination of lens flare from the sun and a close-up of her face or something similar. However, I'm not dismissing her story. In fact, I can relate to it because I too have had a similar encounter, which prompted me to see if anyone else had encountered something like a predator in the woods. Now let me share my encounter. When I was 5 years old, I was playing at the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandma kept an eye on me from the kitchen or living room, as the house had huge windows facing the woods. She would come out every once in a while to check on me. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention that this was the Midwest in Illinois, not too far from the Cahokia Mounds, so finding arrowheads was quite common. Now, that day, I remember picking a spot to dig. I had been out there for quite a while, and I had a pretty decent-sized hole going when something caught my eye up in the tree next to me. It was hard to explain, but it looked almost like a heat wave coming off the branch. I distinctly remember it was fall. I was wearing my pink jacket and thought my mom would be upset because I had dirt on the sleeves from digging. The ground was also covered with leaves. Now, as I stared at this heat wave, I realized it had a human shape. Now, at 5 years old, I wondered why there was an invisible man in the tree. I felt scared, but was unsure about what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. That's when I decided I shouldn't be seeing this, so I quickly ran back to the house. My grandmother noticed I was shaking, and I remember telling her that I had just seen an angel. Now, in my 5-year-old mind, I couldn't think of anything else it could have been. I had never heard of aliens, ghosts, or monsters, so to me, it had to be an angel. Now, fast forward to when I was about 12 years old. By this time, the encounter was far from my mind. I loved watching action and sci-fi movies. One day, my dad rented a movie called Predator. While watching it with him, I was terrified when the invisible and cloaked predator first appeared. All the memories from that day of digging in dirt came flooding back. I even asked my dad if the predator was real or if he knew of any animal or creature with cloaking ability that I didn't know about. He told me it was all fake. Back then, I didn't have access to the internet, so I once again pushed it out of my mind. Fast forward to around 2004. I was an adult with 3 small children. After recently separating from my husband, I moved with my kids to an apartment in the town next town over. Now, these apartments were all single-level duplexes, and there were 5 buildings in total. I lived in the last apartment of the buildings. Although the flats were considered in town, they were situated on the outskirts. Behind the buildings was a deep ditch separated from our backyard by a chain link fence. On our side of the fence, there were about 6 or 7 trees. Now, if you followed the ditch a short distance, you would reach a small forest that eventually led to the countryside with larger forest and farmland beyond. I was a smoker, but didn't smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often stepped out in the back porch for a cigarette. One night, I was up late doing laundry after the kids had gone to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before heading to sleep. While on the porch, I began to hear a faint clicking sound. Since I had seen a groundhog in the ditch a few days earlier, I looked there, thinking it might have been out again. An outside light near the playground dimly lit the yard to the right of my porch, but I didn't turn on the porch light. I usually didn't if I was just going out for a quick smoke. Now, not seeing any groundhog or movement in the ditch, I continued smoking. The faint clicking noise persisted, and a slight movement drew my attention to the tree to the left of my porch. There it was, the exact invisible figure I had seen when I was 5. It was a distorted human shape, crouched on a branch with one arm wrapped around the tree trunk. I couldn't believe it. My thoughts raced. Is this really happening? Is this here to harm me, or seeing it all those years ago? Now, this account describes 2 encounters separated by nearly 20 years involving the same core elements: a humanoid shape defined by visual distortion rather than solidity, a faint clicking sound, arboreal positioning, and immediate fear upon recognition. Now, what is notable is not the later association with popular media, but the original childhood experience predates culture exposure to cloaked entities. The later encounter did not introduce new features, it reinforced the original perception. Now, reports of invisible or partially cloaked humanoid figures appear sporadically in modern encounter literature and more broadly in older accounts of forest beings, watchers in the trees, or entities perceived as distortions of light rather than physical forms. Now, these parallels provide context, not explanation. Now, at this stage, the report supports continuity rather than intent or identity. It does not establish what the phenomenon is. It only shows that the witness recognized the same form under different life conditions decades apart. This is the central issue for tonight's discussion. When recognition precedes explanation, the repetition occurs without escalation. What does that tell us about the nature of the experience itself? Now, before we talk about the following report, if you're enjoying tonight's presentation and want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. It really helps us to reach more people who are searching for answers about the unexplained. And make sure to click the notification bell so you won't miss any of our live shows. Now, the next case, the following account shifts from a single witness to a short-lived regional wave of reports. What we are examining here is not an isolated encounter, but how multiple descriptions, media coverage, and the geography intersect over a brief period of time. Listen for consistency, escalation, and how quickly interpretation enters the narrative. Now, in April of 1971, residents of Mobile, Alabama suburbs reported sightings of what they called the Wolf Woman, who was roaming the streets at night, particularly on Davis Avenue. Witnesses described the creature as having human upper body and a wolf's lower body with long hair flowing like a mane. It was said to run on all fours. Now, according to a report in the local newspaper, the Mobile Register, one witness described it as a woman and wolf, pretty and hairy. Some claim to have been chased and stalked by the wolf woman, even reporting seeing her wandering around properties. The Mobile Register even included an illustration in one of its articles. Although no one was injured, law enforcement in the newspaper took the report seriously after receiving up to 50 calls detailing sightings. Now, after 10 days of reported encounters, the creature mysteriously disappeared. There is always a possibility that these sightings were fabricated. One person might claim to have seen something unusual, and then hysteria could ensue, or attention seeking individuals might exaggerate the events. However, what intrigues me is what the first woman or first person actually saw. To me, seeing a wolf woman is distinctly different from spotting a big old mountain lion. Though it seems unlikely, there is a theory that the wolf woman could have been a feral woman. The case of the Lobo Wolf Girl or of Devil's River is a documented incident of a feral child, and we know feral kids have existed throughout history. One additional point that stands out is the date and the location of the sightings. Mobile is a port city on Alabama's panhandle, on the Gulf of Mexico, not far from Pensacola, Florida. This incident did not occur in the rugged back hills of Appalachia. While there may be stereotypes suggesting that everyone south of Kentucky is a hillbilly, I seriously doubt that the residents of Mobile in 1970 fit that description. Now, this case involves multiple reports concentrated in the specific area over a short duration, with descriptions that are similar but not identical. Now, that combination raises two competing possibilities: recurrence of the real stimulus or amplification through attention and expectation. Now, what stands out is the hybrid description. Witnesses did not describe a known animal acting strangely, but rather a figure with mixed human and animal traits with an upright posture combined with quadrupedal movement. That type of description appears repeatedly in historical encounter waves, regardless of culture or region. Now, historically and folklorically, wolf-like humanoids appear in European werewolf traditions, feral human legends, and modern accounts of upright canines. These parallels help define how such experiences are interpreted once they enter the public awareness. They do not establish what was actually present on Mobile streets. Now, from an investigative standpoint, the short lifespan of the sightings, the lack of physical evidence, and the absence of injury suggests a phenomenon that burned out rather than evolved. Whether the initial trigger was misidentification, an unusual individual, or something else entirely cannot be determined from the record. Now, what this case contributes to tonight's theme is not proof of a returning entity, but an example of how encounter narratives can propagate rapidly once shared, creating a temporary pattern that feels real to those involved even when its origin remains unclear. Now, in the following account is secondhand, relayed through a witness recalling a conversation with a coworker. Now, what we are examining here is not personal observation, but how shared sightings, time period, and reported corroboration factors into a broader pattern. Listen for what is claimed to have been seen, how many people were reportedly present, and where certainty gives way to recognition. Hello, Mr. Strickler. I'm a big fan. I'm reaching out to share something I previously communicated to Linda Moulton Howe unfortunately I didn't follow up with her at the time. Now, my mom used to be a switchboard operator at what was once the Hotel Dixie, later renamed the Hotel Carter, located in Midtown Manhattan. I occasionally accompanied her on the weekends when she went to work, and while she worked, I entertained myself by reading books, often choosing dinosaurs as my favorite subject. Now, during that time, I had a fascinating conversation with a maintenance worker whose name might have been Vito or Vincent. I can't remember exactly. He shared a story about riding down a highway in Long Beach, New York. Now, as he drove with the beach and water to his right, he looked up and saw what he initially thought was a large kite. To his amazement, it turned out to be a large prehistoric flying reptile, possibly a pterodon. What shocked him even more was the other people stopped their cars to observe this creature as well. The pterodons seemed curious about the onlookers hovering in the wind current as they watched. The maintenance worker regretted not having a camera, while some other drivers did manage to take pictures of the sighting. After a short time, the pterodon lost interest in the observers and glided away, lazily flapping its wings 2 to 3 times before disappearing from sight. What's truly amazing about this incident is that Linda Moulton Howe reported another sighting of the same creature a few months to a year later. I also mentioned this alleged sighting to Jonathan Whitcomb, clarifying that although I didn't personally witness it, my mother's co-worker did, and this occurred during the late 1970s. So this report is one step removed from direct observation, which immediately places limits on what can be concluded. The core elements include a large flying creature resembling a prehistoric reptile, multiple motorists stopping to observe it, and the claim that the photographs were taken, though none are present here. Now, sightings of large pterosaur-like flying creatures have appeared intermittently in modern reports, particularly from the mid to late 20th century. These accounts often include gliding flight, minimal wing beats, and observers initially mistaking the figure for a kite, bird, or aircraft. The similarity defines a descriptive pattern, not confirmation. Now, from an investigative standpoint, the absence of first-hand testimony, physical evidence, or recovered imagery keeps this account in the category of reported observations rather than documented events. The mention of an additional sighting reported elsewhere adds interest, but does not independently verify the case. What this report contributes to tonight's discussion is an example of how encounter narratives persist through retelling, especially when tied to recognizable forms and the belief that others also witness the event. It illustrates how repetition across sources can suggest continuity even when direct evidence remains out of reach. So the following account dates to the early 20th century and describes a series of reports rather than a single encounter. What we are examining here is not modern interpretation, but how repeated sightings, pursuit behavior, and escalation were documented long before the contemporary cryptid language existed. Listen for behavior, movement, and how witnesses reacted to the events unfolded over time. Now, the first incident occurred in Grayson County, Texas in September 1904. A group of hunters observed a strange man exhibiting horse-like behavior, which was later reported by others in the area. Nearly a year ago, a resident living along the riverfront near Preston was stirred by appearance of a peculiar being in human form. When discovered by a party of hunters, the figure was on all fours, pawing and neighing like a horse. The hunters' attention was first drawn to what they took to be a whinnying of a startled horse in the undergrowth. Now, as they approached, the strange being ran off on its hands and feet. However, the hunters quickly caught up, prompting the being to stand up. It then sprinted a short distance to the river, plunging headlong from the high bank into the water and swimming to the other side. Upon reaching the opposite bank, it stood up and shook itself like a horse just out of a bath, and let out what could be described as a horse-like laugh before running off into the woods. Now, months later, the being was again seen under similar circumstances, this time west of Woodville on the other side, or the Indian side. Recently, a man was observed crawling across the road in plain view of several people near where the horseman was first seen, but it disappeared before he could be pursued. Since last Sunday, residents near Cobert, 10 miles east of Preston, have been searching for a strangely behaving man who crawled like a snake. When pursued, he jumped to his feet and outruns even the fastest horses. Witnesses who chased him on foot claimed they shot at him from close range, but the bullets appeared to have no effect, even if they struck him. As of last evening, children reported seeing the crawling man near the Varner place, 6 miles from Cobert. A phone message from Cobert this afternoon confirmed previous reports from Durant about the excitement in the area and the gathering of several groups of pursuit. However, public interest was waned somewhat because some who were present when shots were fired reported that the peculiar being vanished amid the smoke of the gunpowder, despite being in an open and very close. Now, at the Varner place, he crawled into the hen house. A dead chicken was found in the field, bitten at the neck, with signs indicating that blood had been drawn. Though enthusiasm has diminished somewhat, the residents of the Varner neighborhood are preparing for another major round this afternoon and tonight. Now, this case involves multiple sightings over an extended period, reported by several or different witnesses within a confined region. The descriptions emphasize abnormal locomotion, rapid speed, apparent resistance to injury, and sudden disappearance. What stands out is the behavioral focus. Witnesses consistently describe the figure crawling or moving on all fours, abruptly transitioning to upright movement and displaying speed beyond what observers believe to be humanly possible. These are observations, not conclusions. Historically and folklorically, similar accounts appear in 19th and early 20th century newspapers that often framed as wild men, feral humans, or unidentified prowlers before modern cryptid terminology emerged. That context shows how some or such encounters are recorded before cultural expectations were shaped by later media. Now, from an investigative standpoint, the lack of physical capture, contradictory pursuit outcomes, and gradual loss of public interest suggests a phenomenon that generated alarm through repetition but resisted resolution. Whether the case was an unusual individual, exaggeration over time, or something else entirely cannot be determined from the reports alone. What this incident contributes to tonight's theme is the early example of recurring encounters that create continuity through repetition, even when identity, origin, and the explanation remain unresolved. Now, in this last case, the following account involves a single witness describing a complex experience that spans an initial incident, later attempts at verification, and subsequent personal and emotional consequences. Now, what we are examining here is not interpretation or belief, but continuity across memory, location, physical sensation, and later discovery. Listen carefully for what is directly experienced, what is later recalled, and where uncertainty remains. Now, in 2008, the witness states, I encountered two men who flashed me with a device while I was parked beside the Klamath River in California. They pulled up behind my Jeep and pointed the device over the river, then moved alongside my vehicle and flashed it at me. I passed out. When I woke up, they were on a bridge flashing the device out over the river again. I ended up driving over the bridge and back to Crescent City, where I checked into a motel. My left eye and face were badly burned. I couldn't swallow water or eat food for at least 24 hours, and I struggled to sleep. The next day, I drove back to Portland, Oregon. I didn't tell many people about the incident, even though I had been working on a novel that I couldn't finish, a novel centered around a similar paranormal topic. In 2018, I returned to try to find the bridge. Now, to my surprise, there was no bridge in the area. Eventually, my girlfriend discovered that the bridge had existed there, but it washed out in 1964. Now, when I saw pictures of the bridge, I collapsed, and my face and my back of my head started to tingle. The left side of my face went numb for a few minutes. We returned to our hotel and drove back later. A man resembling the two who had flashed me was parked in the front of the bridge memorial. I kept driving and didn't stop. He followed us in his white van for about 2 miles before disappearing. He must have turned around as the road wound through a curvy forest, making it easy to do so. The man's van vanished right near a graveyard. Witnesses, some of whom were well known, claimed to have seen giant figures walking along the river in the area. However, I never saw any giant beings either time I visited. I did speak with several people who reported seeing a giant cowboy in the area at dusk. Now, additionally, a local Native American who camps on his land nearby claimed to have seen the giant Bigfoot by the river. So in 2014, I underwent hypnosis to recall the events in greater detail. The hypnotist was professionally licensed in ultra-depth hypnosis. Now, during the session, my memories of the event were just a standard alien abduction. The two men and their car did not feature in my hypnotic recollections. The sessions were recorded. Now, I shared the recordings with friends, and a few times these friends experienced serious misfortune afterwards. The most dramatic incident was when my girlfriend got into a near-fatal car accident the same night she watched the videos of my hypnosis sessions. The accident occurred on her way home next to a large electrical relay station dozens of miles from my house and occurred at night. In 2018, I shared my story with local Native Americans. Now, the wives of the tribal elders from the nearby tribe were very interested and wanted to take me out to lunch to hear more, but I had to leave to return to Portland for work. Their interest in my story was intense, and I wondered why. Now, after my mom passed away, my girlfriend found her diary. In it, my mom had written about visiting a trail close to where my experiences occurred. She noted strange sounds during their hike. For her to write that, there must have been more to it. She never exaggerated about such matters. I was shocked to find out that my mom had visited the same area a few months after my experience in 2008. I told my dad about it, and they made a special trip to the location. I questioned their motivations. Was it just the area's beauty, or was it something more? Now, there is more to the story, but this is enough for now. I'm choosing not to reveal the bridge's location. I still might write my experiences into a book. At the time of the 2008 incident, I lived in Portland, Oregon. I had delayed writing it all down because I feel fearful. Each time I start, my supernatural instincts tell me to be cautious. I avoid any supernatural influences in my life, and I do not want any contact with spirits. Moving out of Portland helped. After I put my house up for sale, I discovered it had a high radon level, so it's fortunate I moved. I believe radon can increase supernatural activity. Some may argue that my experiences were hallucinations, but I know they weren't, and there were too many witnesses. I have had many girlfriends over the past 13 years, with two of them living with me. The second one, who moved in with me, ended up physically abusing me, but I won't delve into that. It's just too painful. I will say that AI on dating platforms like Match.com can potentially link people in unexpected ways. When I told my girlfriend on the second date that I had been gaslit, it seemed to attract her as a mark. I'm not one for self-pity, which is why I won't go into detail about the other girlfriend who lived at the house. She claimed to see ghosts, and she wanted me to move. She was right about that, but she also was very dangerous. I found out she was collecting $1,000 per month for mental disability from the state of Oregon. I never figured out she had been committed, but I suspect she may have been. Now, this account combines a primary incident with long-term after effects, including physical symptoms, memory gaps, later investigative efforts, and perceived follow-up events. The core experience centers on loss of consciousness, injury, disorientation, and difficulty reconciling location and time. What complicates this report is the layering of information for many years. The original event is later reinterpreted through hypnosis, return visits, third-party stories, and family discoveries. Each layer adds context, but it also distance from the initial observation. Now, historically, similar cases often merge personal experience with location-based lore. reported pursuit of surveillance, and subsequent misfortune. These elements are common in long-duration encounter narratives, regardless of the phenomenon proposed. Now, from an investigative standpoint, the absence of independent documentation, the reliance on recovered memory, and the accumulation of coincidental or emotionally charged events make firm conclusions impossible. What can be said is that this witness experienced an event that perceived as real, disruptive, and unresolved, and its meaning evolved over time rather than becoming clear. For tonight's theme, this report illustrates how a single encounter can echo forward, creating a sense of continuity, not through repetition of the event itself, but through lasting impact, reinterpretation, and personal consequence.